It was William Shakespeare who once said that life is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It was Friedrich Nietzsche who once said, every person, even the strong ones, experience a moment of fatigue. It was that bumper sticker, of all things, that all of us have seen that once read, life is a bear and then we die, except the word's not bear, if you know what I mean. No matter how you say it, life is no bowl of cherries, is it? We have been burdened and battered by baggage. Burdened by illness. And I don't have to tell any of you in this congregation, when it hits, you tend to lose control of your own lives. There's the pain and the physical limitations and the not wanting to get out of bed in the morning. There's the fear of not knowing what's happened next. The fear of knowing what's happening next. There's the hospital visits and doctor visits and surgeries and treatments and tests and waiting for the results of the tests. You know as well as I know that illnesses are life-changing, and there are a lot of things in this life that we can do without, but one of them is not health. Another burden that all of us have experienced, I suppose, is death. It's where all of our lives, earthly life anyway, end up. A loved one dies, and there is the loneliness of the long hours of the night, the empty spot at the kitchen table. There's the worry whether you did all you can do. There's the anger at the person for dying and the anger at God for letting them die. We're all scared to death of death. And I suppose in the long run, it's the worst burden of all. There's the burden that too many of us have known of not having enough money. The month comes to an end and there are more bills than cash. Job loss, layoff, reduction in hours have hit too many of our houses. And you know as well as I know that the deeper the hole gets, the more difficult it is to dig yourself out. Gnawing poverty has an ache all its own. The burden of too much money. Gnawing affluence has its own ache. The ache of trying to figure out how we're going to manage and juggle all of the things that we have cluttered our lives with. Car payments and soccer practices and business schedules and community associations and church activities and club memberships. When you look at our schedules, they look like we are being nibbled to death by a duck. And you begin to wonder, or at least I have, whether it's worse to have too little or too much. And then there's the burden, if you're the people in this text, of not being good enough. James 2:10 said that whoever keeps the whole law, and fails in a single point is guilty of all of it. Try as they might, they never quite could figure out how they could be good enough for God. That was part of Luther's problem. He went to the monastery to try and be good enough for God, and he never made it. When you try and keep the whole law, we fail. You shall not steal, guilty. You shall not commit adultery, guilty. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's possessions, guilty. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, guilty. If you have ever been made to feel not good enough by a boss or a pastor or a neighbor or a teacher, you'll know how painful it is. It's when life looks like this that Jesus' words are the most precious. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. It's as if Jesus is saying to us, here, let me help. Let me carry it for a while. Let me give you rest. And folks, if you don't mind, for a moment, if I could share with you just a couple of clues about what God's rest is. First, it can best be found in a community. When things get so difficult, it's the people around us that becomes very, very important. Paul says in Galatians, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And the law of Christ is love. And there are people all around us in this congregation and in your communities and within your frame of references who want to help. Who want to help you carry the burdens of life. Let them. Use them. God wills it. Secondly, the rest of God involves trusting God. There are just things in our lives we can't handle. God's got a bigger shoulder than any one of you, any one of us in this room. My invitation to us is when something comes along that's just too big or too frightening or too fearful, hand it over. Because if you can't deal with it, maybe God can. And thirdly, it is my experience that the rest of God invites us to take life one day at a time. There's not a person in this room that can boil the ocean. And when something happens in our lives that are just so big, when the elephant appears in the room, the only thing you can do is knock it down to a size that you can manage piece by piece, bit by bit. Life is like that. Sometimes we can only handle it one day at a time. I had a person in our congregation this morning came up to me after this sermon. This person is a recovering alcoholic, thanking me one day at a time. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. A rest that's found in the community of the faithful. A rest that's found by trusting God. A rest that's found in taking life one day at a time. Given the world in which we live, is there anything any of us need more than that kind of rest?